Hey everybody, welcome to Money's No Object. I'm your host, Dylan Howell. This is episode number 207 of our YouTube channel and podcast, and I cannot be more excited to continue sharing with you guys personal finance topics that I think can be useful for you in your long-term financial journey. Today, we are going to be talking about trusts, and specifically how trusts can play a part in your financial life. I told you throughout the course of this week, we are going to talk about inheritances. We're going to talk about leaving a legacy financially, right? And one big part of leaving a legacy financially is our estate planning documents. And we're specifically going to key in on the trust because I've talked a little bit about the other documents like wills and power of attorney documents, which I will allude to a bit today. But trusts are very, very important, especially for those who build any type of substantial wealth over time. So I think it's important for us to key in on this and learn more about what trusts can do for us in our long-term financial journey. Before we get started though, if you could go down below, hit the big red subscribe button, like this video, leave me any feedback in the comments down below, and I'll be sure to respond to anything you leave down there. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify podcasts, be sure to subscribe and leave me a review on either one of those platforms. Follow me on social media at MNO with Dylan, and that's really good supplemental materials to all the things I'm putting out in these long form episodes on YouTube and the podcast every single day. And then if you need somebody to help you to create a financial plan that is specific to you and your family's needs and keep you accountable to that plan over the long term, then I can do that. Just go to my website, www.mnowithdylan.com. Click on the Work with Dylan tab, and you can choose the financial coaching session type that would work best for you, and we can begin pushing towards your long-term financial goals together. Now, there's something about this idea of leaving a legacy behind where education has just not been there. And we've just missed the boat on knowing what to do in order to make the transfer of assets to our heirs as frictionless as possible. And I think that's a big issue, which is why I'm addressing this in this week's episodes, this idea of leaving a legacy, this idea of leaving money behind and doing so in an efficient way. Well, if there's one particular document, one particular thing that can help you to do that, right, in the best way possible, it is probably the trust, right? And a lot of this that we're going to talk about today is legal, right? A trust is a legal document, right? Just like a will is a legal document, but you probably don't know a whole lot about trusts, again, because the education on these types of things is lacking. There's not a whole lot of education as to what good a trust can do. All we've ever heard of are trust funds and trust fund babies, and there's been this negative connotation to someone having a trust. And I'm going to try to turn that around in your mind a bit today because you will find that trusts aren't just for the uber wealthy, right? Yes, that's who we associate them with, but that's not all that they're for. You'll find that having a trust for most individuals in the long term, anybody who has built any type of substantial assets, having a trust is beneficial, and it can allow you to do things financially and make decisions financially that once you're gone, things can be done in a specific way, and you are happy with that, and you can actually control what's going to happen with the things and the money and the assets that you have, and you're not going to have people constantly bickering and fighting over what your decisions were, because your decisions are final, and there is no contesting that. Okay, but we know what a will is. Most people do, at least. And if you don't, I'm going to do a quick comparison, right? I'm going to give you what a will is, and then we will get into exactly what a trust is, how trusts work, and if you need one or not. Now, wills and trusts are both estate planning documents, and they can help you to ensure that your assets are protected and bequeathed to your heirs, right? Get passed down to your heirs in a proper way. Your spouse is typically not an issue here, but it comes down to your heirs beyond your spouse. Okay. Now, this is because the unlimited marital deduction provision within the United States estate and gift tax law allows the passing of wealth to a surviving spouse without incurring gift or estate tax liabilities. Right. So this is why you hear a lot of trust type things associated with wealthier individuals, because they're trying to stay away from gift tax and estate taxes if at all possible. But with people who have less, this is far less of an issue, but there can still be some distinct advantages of having these documents in place. However, the transfer process becomes much more involved when wealth is passed to a subsequent generation, right? It's possible to have both a will and a trust. So these aren't you have one or have the other. These are differing documents. A will is a written document that expresses a deceased person's wishes, from naming guardians for a minor child to bequeathing objects and cash assets to friends, relatives, or charities. A will becomes active only after one's death. A trust is active the day that you create it. And a grantor, which we'll talk about what a grantor is here in a little while, right? A grantor may list the distribution of assets before their death in it, unlike a will. There are irrevocable trusts, right? Or irrevocable trusts, meaning you can't change what is in that trust. And they're often created for tax purposes, which cannot be altered after their creation. And living trusts, which can be changed by the grantor or the individual who is setting up the trust for themselves. All wills, though, must go through a legal process called probate, where an authorized court administrator examines them, and this process can be lengthy and potentially contentious if a family member contests the will. Trusts are not required to go through probate when the grantor dies, and they cannot be contested, right? So this is a big distinct advantage of the trust that we're going to jump into today. So what I want to help you to decide and discern is whether you need a will, a trust, or both. And I'll just go ahead and tell you right now, if you're somebody who you're married, and especially if you have minor children, or you have any type of assets between you and your spouse, or just you by yourself that you want to leave behind to someone, then a will is a good idea. Almost anybody who has anything, right, needs to have some type of will, just to say in the most basic form what happens when you are to pass away. All right, but a trust is not that simple, and a trust is not as needed for everyone. Okay, so we'll talk about whether you need a will or trust, the different types of trusts, right? And then the advantages and disadvantages of the trust itself, okay? So let's jump into some of these things. And now when I say trust, you can also hear me say living trust. Now, living trust, we're going to talk about exactly why I say living trust, but let's get right into it, okay? A living trust is a special kind of fund that can own someone's stuff while they're still living. You may say, well, that sounds weird. Well, won't I own my stuff? Well, yes, but let's pump the brakes for just a second. And just like all trust funds, a living trust also spells out how to distribute what's in the trust after the original owner dies. Almost anything can be placed into a living trust, and if it has value of any kind, it can go in. Some examples are real estate, bank accounts, vehicles, fine art and jewelry, virtual valuable items like intellectual property, or, now we're getting into this world of NFTs, right? And maybe that's something that can be put into a trust. Now, how exactly do these living trusts work? Well, when a living trust is formed, right, the one who owns the stuff, which this is the grantor. I said we talk about what a grantor is. The grantor is the individual who owns the stuff. So if I want to set up a trust for myself, right, that trust is going to be granted. I am going to be the grantor of the trust. Okay, so the one who owns the stuff, the grantor, transfers the ownership of their assets to the trust itself. Okay, now let's pretend you own an investment property. If you have a living trust, you can take the deed of the property, scratch off your name, and put the name of the trust. From that point on, you will not own the property anymore. The trust would. Now, you can do the same thing with titles to vehicles, documents from financial accounts, and anything else you want to put in the name of the trust. This is called funding a trust, because you are putting all of the things into a trust that you want to keep away from the courts and keep away from having to go through probate when you are to pass away. And so you fund the trust. So just setting up a trust is one thing, but you actually have to go about funding it. You have to go about putting things in the name of that trust for it to matter. Okay. Then a trustee is named. Okay. And this person is named, or persons, it can be multiple people, is named by the grantor of the trust. So the grantor of the trust would be, again, the individual who set it up, right? And they are named by the grantor in the trust document to make sure that the instructions in the trust contract are carried out. These are a lot like executors of a will, right? Because an executor of a will is there to execute what the individual whose will it is says that they need to execute, the things that need to be done when they pass away. So a trustee makes sure that a trust is carried out. The trustee might be a relative or can be appointed as some professional trustee, usually from a financial institution. From that trust fund, the grantor can leave a full inheritance to their heirs called the beneficiaries, right? And we'll talk a little bit more this week, especially in tomorrow's episode, about what beneficiaries are and exactly how beneficiaries are important to our financial lives as well, right? But they can leave the full inheritance to their beneficiaries, and they have the power to place certain conditions that need to be met before beneficiaries can receive items from the inheritance, right? These are things like a grandchild finishing college before they inherit a car or they inherit some assets, right? That's a fun thing about a trust. I say fun. There's nothing fun about a trust being executed or being played out, because that means somebody has passed away. But one of the interesting things about a trust, one of the things that is most beneficial about a trust, is that you can put any stipulations on your assets that you want to. You can put anything in there that you want to say has to be done before somebody can receive the assets that you are leaving behind to them, which is a very, very big deal, because it allows parents to hold their kids accountable before their kids can get their hands on any money. It allows them to hold other heirs, like their grandchildren, accountable before they can get their hands on any money. And it allows people from beyond the grave to make decisions about their money. And this is a very, very big deal. And these are decisions that you would have made anyway. These are things that you would have done regardless of you passing away or not. But these things can still be enacted even though you're not there to make sure that it is enacted. Okay. Now, there are two types of living trusts. Now, I talked about one just very, very slightly a moment ago, and we're going to go into it here, right? But there are really two types. There's revocable or revocable, right? Potato, trusts, or there's irrevocable or irrevocable trusts. Okay, now let's look at these two types. The revocable trusts, right, is by far the most common type of living trust. So much so that people refer to it simply as a living trust. They don't typically say revocable living trust. It just is a living trust, or a living revocable trust, right, if you want to get a little more technical as to what it is. Just as the name hints, a revocable trust can be changed or revoked, meaning canceled, by the grantor at any time. Okay, so if you set up this trust as the grantor, you can cancel the trust. You can cancel what you set out in that trust, or you can change it, make any changes on beneficiaries or who gets what or what goes to whom or whatever, right? You can make the changes that you need to make at any given time. Now, doing this is not quick, but it can be done, and so it makes it more flexible. So you can see just right off the bat why this is the more common of the two types of trusts, because if you set up a trust while you are living, especially if you set up a trust relatively early in life, that trust is going to change many, many times over the course of many years. Right, that what you need to have done within that trust is going to change many, many times. Whether your trustee, passes away, or you don't trust that person, or you want somebody else to be your trustee, or your kids get older, or your kids make bad decisions that you don't agree with, and you want to take them out of your estate planning documents. Whatever it is, right, the revocable trust can allow you to make the changes that you need to make, which is very, very attractive to just about anybody who is trying to go and set up a trust. Okay, but there's also the irrevocable trust. Now, the irrevocable trust is active and cannot be changed, even by the grantor, even by the person who set up the trust, the person whose assets that are in this particular trust. You cannot change what you set out in an irrevocable trust. Now, it would take a judge to decide whether a change can be made, and even then the circumstances would have to be pretty special, because in its name, right, it is irrevocable, right? You cannot revoke it, you cannot cancel it, you cannot change it, right? And this is something that makes a lot of people go, well, I don't think I want an irrevocable trust, okay? But there are some distinct advantages that irrevocable trusts have. Now, since the revocable trust is the more popular option, right, some people might start off with a revocable trust and then convert it to irrevocable later in life when they don't feel like changes are going to need to be made from there on. The other thing to know about both types of living trusts is that when the grantor has died, their revocable trust automatically converts to an irrevocable one anyway, because the only person who could have changed the trust is the grantor of the trust, right? Is the person who made it, is the person whose assets that were funding that particular trust, right? And since that person is gone, then nobody else can make changes. So it is now irrevocable once that person has passed on. Okay, but the irrevocable and revocable is just while you are living and while you have it set up. Do you want it to be changed? Do you want to have the option to have it changed? Or do you want to just leave it alone and let it just be what it is, and you have made your mind up and that's what it is, right? There are distinct advantages of the irrevocable trust. I'm not going to go too far into it today, but you can look into those on your own. Some of them have things to do with long-term care. They have things to do with Medicare and Medicaid and things of the like, right? There's a lot of different caveats to irrevocable trusts that individuals try to take advantage of and sometimes do so in an ineffective manner. But I'm not here to talk a ton about irrevocable trust because they aren't the more popular option. The revocable trust is the more popular option, and so we're going to focus a lot of our time there. But in general, we're just talking about these living trusts. We're talking about trusts in general and why they may be advantageous to you. And so let's jump right to the benefits of the living trust. Okay, now living trust could have some advantages for you over other ways to manage your estate. Okay, so here are some of the benefits. First benefit, saves time and money in the probate process. Now, like I said a little while ago, wills have to go through probate, meaning the court has to mull over these documents. They have to make sure that everything gets done in the correct way. They have to examine what was left behind within the will, right? And even then, right, people can come and challenge the will. But you cannot challenge the trust. The trust is set in stone. The trust is what it is and does not have to go through probate court. Right, a living trust names a trustee who can immediately take care of your end-of-life affairs, like paying for funeral costs and distributing property to heirs, without having to wait on the probate judge. Less waiting time means less probate costs and more savings, and it means more of your money that can be left behind for those that you intended to have your money or your assets anyway. Right? So this is very, very attractive that it can save time and money. Then it offers more protection if challenged. So a living trust is less likely to be challenged in court than a simple will. It's harder for the challengers because they would have to prove you were coerced into signing the documents and forced to go through the whole process of funding the trust, which is very, very hard to prove in the first place, whether or not somebody is in the right state of mind or not. Right? But a lot of people are making trusts when they're in a perfectly good state of mind, right? They have already made their decisions, and it's very, very hard to challenge that person is not in good mental standing or wasn't in good mental standing when they made the decisions that they made. A lot of people have trusts and they have them for long, long periods of time. So it's very, very hard to challenge. And then not only is it hard to challenge, it doesn't have to go through probate court anyway. So the assets just go immediately to the heirs and things can be done in a fairly straightforward manner. Okay. Then the third part of a living trust that is very, very beneficial is that it protects your privacy better because a will is a public document, right? Anybody can go and look up the fact that you have a will, right? Anybody can get a copy of it after your death from the county records. But a living trust is totally private. With a trust, no one can know the details without the trustee sharing the information. That's why it's very, very important to pick a trustee that you trust, right? That's why they are a trustee, because you trust them. You trust them to be able to carry out what you have set out in your trust. You want them to do the things in the way that you have said for them to do, and you believe that they will do that and interpret what you have said in a proper manner. Right? And you also want them to be trustworthy so they don't go and spill the beans to everybody exactly who, got what and why and how much and all these different types of things. Right? If the trustee shares that information, that's on them. That's not completely illegal or anything, right? But without that trustee divulging the information, then nobody would ever know. Right? Nobody would ever know exactly what went to who, or without the people talking. And people talk, so people tend to figure out. But at the same time, there is privacy, and there are just tricky situations in the world. That's part of the estate planning process that is very, very evident, is that everybody's situation is different, and things are not as cut and dry. Things are very dynamic. And some people have situations where they don't want people to know what they've done with their money, and they don't want people to know exactly what's going on with the money that they've left behind. They want it to be a secret, and a trust can allow you to do that. Now, what are disadvantages of a living trust? Now, not everything is rosy with a living trust, so it's important to weigh the pros and cons before you decide to create one. Here are a few issues that could make having one a hassle. Okay, so first, there's just a personal inconvenience of having to do so. Right? Since it's set up before you die, none of the stuff in the trust is your property anymore. It's the property of the trust. So if you want to sell something that's already a part of the trust, like your house or your car, you have to contact the trustee, if it's not you, right, to take it out of the trust before you can sell it. Right? So this makes a lot more red tape when it comes to doing some very, very basic tasks that people think that they could do on their own, and people should be able to do on their own, but it just makes things a little more tricky. So there are inconveniences that come with being able to set up a living trust. All right. The second disadvantage of a living trust are attorney's fees. Now, trusts can be very, very costly. Okay, now this is one of the things that makes a lot of people think that trusts are for just wealthy people, because trusts are costly documents to set up. They are not cheap. Now, you can easily get a will online, right? You can get a will set up. It's very little issue, very little friction to getting a will set up. But getting a trust takes a little more work, right? You should only set up a trust with an attorney. Right? A trust should not be set up online. It should be something that you walk through with your attorney and you get everything set up exactly how you want it. Right? Just know their guidance comes with attorney's fees, right? And a couple $1,000s will get it off the ground, will get you into that living trust. And that is a lot of money. But to make sure that your hopes and dreams for your money and for your assets are actually played out without you being here to do it for yourself, that's a price that you have to pay. And if you need to make a change to your living trust, obviously you'll have to pay the attorney all over again, which means more fees. Right? So these can be costly things to do over longer periods of time, which kind of brings me to a point where I don't think that people that don't have some substantial amount of assets, and substantial can mean different things to different people, but I don't think that people who lack substantial assets should be getting some living trust, because first of all, you lack assets to leave behind anyway, right? Second of all, you're not going to have a tax issue. Right? You're not going to have an issue where you're having to limit estate taxes or limit, your gift tax exclusion or whatever, right? Because those numbers are extremely high, and those limitations are extremely high until you actually have to pay things like the gift tax, right? And so, understanding that that is the case, and that these are very costly documents to create and keep up, if you make a modest salary and you have a modest amount of assets, then a trust may not be what you need. Now, like I said earlier, everybody needs a will. Everybody needs something that gives their last wishes and gives, what should be done upon their death. And even, says who gets what, and your power of attorney documents and things like that. Power of attorney documents being, your durable and your medical power of attorney, which says, who can make decisions for you if you're not able to make decisions for yourself, who can sign for you if you're not able to sign for yourself, and you can designate those people as your powers of attorney, right? Now, those things are necessary. Those things are things that you should have. Those are things that if you don't have them today, and especially if you have, a spouse, or you have kids, or you are in any position in life where somebody else other than you relies on you, then having that set out and spelled out perfectly is a very important thing, and it is not as costly as setting up a trust. Right? So you can go get a will and power of attorney documents, and it's not extremely expensive. Now, it's not $20, right? But it's also not thousands. Okay, a trust does require you to loosen the purse strings a bit and really see if you're willing to set things like this up for your family, and really have things set up in the perfect way that you want them to be set up over the long term. And then the third disadvantage of a living trust is the retitle and redeed process. Now, after the attorney sets it up, they'll give you some homework to retitle or redeed property and other items so the trust is named as the owner. If you don't do this, the trust doesn't work to its full potential. You've basically paid for a blanket of protection, but you haven't put anything under the blanket. Many trusts are established, but they are never funded. And that is so, so sad, because the attorneys are still going to charge you for the trust. They're still going to charge you for setting up that trust, but you have to go about actually funding the trust and putting things in the name of the trust. And if you don't do this, then your wishes are not going to be carried out in the way that you want them to be. Okay, so this can be extremely disadvantageous, right? This can be a disadvantage. to setting up a trust, because you have to actually go out and make sure that all of these things occur. Especially if you set up a trust and you're far older, or you do a big remake of your trust when you're older, and you have to go and do all of these things. You might need help in setting all these things up, and it may take a lot more of your time and effort. And the more assets you have, the more difficult that it's going to be to do all this. But it can be worth it. And it can be worth it in order to leave money to your children, leave assets to your children that the court is not going to be able to dispute. It can be extremely advantageous to leave a trust behind if you have some specific milestones that you want your heirs to hit before they ever touch your money, or some age that you want your heirs to hit before they ever get a hold of any money. I think this is a very, very important thing, and a reason that you don't have to be somebody who is a multi-millionaire in order to have a trust. You can have a trust and have just a decent amount of assets, because if you leave behind any type of substantial assets to a 19-year-old, or you leave them behind to a minor that is actually going to receive it at some point, right, when they are of age, at age 18 or 21 or whatever it is for a particular state, you leave those assets behind. Well, those assets could easily be squandered if these individuals, your children, your grandchildren, don't meet the specific guidelines that you've set aside within the trust for them to meet, whether it's graduating from college, or taking some type of class, or meeting some type of criterion for your grades or your degrees or whatever. I've heard Shaquille O'Neal talk about that each one of his children owes him 2 degrees, right? If you don't know who Shaquille O'Neal is, Shaq, right? Shaq, the Hall of Fame basketball player. He said each of his kids owes him 2 degrees. They're not going to receive any of his money if they don't have 2 degrees, meaning a bachelor's and a master's degree. So that's something he's likely set out in a trust, something that he is written out and had an attorney look over, and has built those trust documents already, because for somebody of his level of wealth, he definitely does need a trust. But he has those things spelled out, and in having those things spelled out, if his kids don't do that, then they don't get his money, and that's just the way it is, right? But that's the way he wants it to be, and that is the big advantage, is that things can go exactly how you want them to go, right? You don't have to worry about, just somebody giving a little leeway here or there, right? If things don't go exactly how you say, right, then there are legal issues with the trustee or whomever, and that can be a big, big issue. So when it comes down to it, the question is, do you need a living trust? Well, while there's not a one-size-fits-all answer, the vast majority of the population can get by without using a living trust, right? Many of you watching this episode right now do not need a living trust today, right? Simple wills are perfect for 95% of the population. Again, you need a will. You need something that says what happens when you die. So in other words, unless you have some larger estate, you have some substantial amount of assets, whatever substantial means to you, and whether you can afford to set up these documents without it being a huge, huge issue for yourself and your family, then you do not need one. Whatever you decide, though, right, you want to take action, you want to make it official, right? If this is something that you do need and something that you do think is extremely advantageous or could be advantageous for you and your family, then you need to go ahead and take action and get it going, right? You don't need to wait, because you don't know what's going to happen to you, when it's going to happen to you, and you don't know what's going to happen to your assets when you're gone if you haven't set out in writing with an attorney officially exactly what is going to happen. So find an estate planning attorney. Find somebody who will help you to work through this process. If all you need is a will, you can go online to many different places. There are many reputable sites where you can get a will and set things out in a will that are perfectly fine. But getting a living trust, you need to find an estate planning attorney that you can sit down with and talk to and really mull over all the things that you have set in your mind as to what you want to happen when you leave assets behind to your children. Look, I want us all to build some type of substantial wealth. Now, again, substantial means different things to different people, right? $250,000 at retirement could mean a lot to one person and mean nothing to another, right? Do I think that's enough for most people? No, but it could be plenty for somebody, right? It could be plenty for somebody's specific situation. That could be substantial for them. I want us all to build something that is substantial enough to sustain us in our older years, something that is substantial enough to sustain us passively, right? Where it creates the income that we need in order to sustain ourselves in retirement. That's what I talked about all last week when I was talking about all those different retirement topics, right? But when it comes to retirement is one thing, right? But getting your estate plan in order is another thing, right? Because you can retire and not have an estate plan in order, and you can really have a lot of your money squandered or things done with your money that you don't want done when you pass away if you don't set the things up exactly how they need to be set up and do so with a trusted estate planning attorney and things like that. So you need to make sure that all of your ducks are in a row, and don't wait till retirement to get these things together. Right? Now, some people may be in retirement and they're like, oh, crud, I need to go and I need to get these things together. Yes, you do, right? But if you're somebody who's not yet in retirement and you have young children, right, and you haven't laid out who the guardians of those young children would be in some estate planning documents, then you need to figure that out, right? If you have, bank accounts and savings accounts and brokerage accounts and vehicles and houses, and you don't know who those will go to if you and your spouse pass away or if you pass away, then you need to go and get those types of things set up, because without it, the probate court is going to be willing to make those decisions for you. And I do not want some state authority, some court, no matter how moral they may be, to make those types of decisions for me. I want to make those decisions for myself, and I can absolutely do that with estate planning documents in the way that I said. So have a will, have power of attorney documents, and then if you have the assets to get a trust, then you can get a trust, and just understand that it's going to take some work, and it is going to take some paying attention, being very intentional in order to get the trust right. But having it right can really be advantageous over the long term. So thanks for watching this episode. If you could go down below, hit the big red subscribe button, like this video, leave me feedback in the comments down below, and I'll be sure to respond to anything you leave down there. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave me a review on either one of those platforms. Follow me on social media at MNO with Dylan, and that's really good supplemental materials to all the things I'm putting out in these long form episodes on YouTube and the podcast every single day. And then if you need somebody to help you to build a financial plan that's specific to you and your family's needs and keep you accountable to that plan over the long term, then I can do that. Just go to my website, www.MNOwithDylan.com. Click on the Work with Dylan tab, and you can choose the financial coaching session type that would work best for you, and we can begin pushing towards your long-term financial goals together. So tune in tomorrow as I talk about beneficiaries and the importance of having beneficiaries named, first off, and having the beneficiaries named on the correct types of accounts, second off, and the impact that having the right beneficiaries named can have on your financial life and leaving a legacy for your family over the long term. All that and more in tomorrow's episode. So thanks for tuning into this episode of Money's No Object. I'm your host, Dylan Howell. God bless.